It's all good.
All right, cool. Hi, Yaratsy. She's back. She fell asleep, guys. She's back. All right, I think we are now live, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello to everyone watching at home. Welcome to another guest speaker session with Generation Activism. My name is Mallory. I'm the executive director and co-founder of GENACT, and I'll be your host for tonight. I'm so excited to introduce to you Lucy James-Olson, who will be talking to us about their experience coming out as non-binary, their views on gender as a whole, and how we can be more supportive and inclusive. We will also be hearing a reading from our member, Sean Cox, on their experience with gender. I'm so excited to have this conversation tonight and to gain some perspective from Lucy. And with that, I'll pass it to Lucy to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I use they, them pronouns. I'm just recently going to be a senior in college in the fall at Mount Holyoke, which is in Western Massachusetts, majoring in something called critical social thought, which is like a liberal arts major kind of. And I'm from Delaware. Mallory's mom and my mom know each other. That's how I got connected with GenAct. But right now I'm in Amherst, Massachusetts.
All right, thank you. And with that, I'll give it to Chelsea to start off our questions for tonight.
Hi, I'm Chelsea, and my question is, when did you come out as non-binary and what was it like?
That is a great question. It's such a hard timeline to track. But I guess when I officially came out, I was in my senior year of high school, or maybe my late junior year of high school. And I didn't really come out to everybody, or I didn't really intentionally come out. I was not really expecting my acquaintances and my teachers at my school to be up on the scoop and able to make that transition. And because I was late in my high school career, it was not super important to me, but to family and friends, that is probably when I came out. And I am lucky to have people who care a lot about me and care enough about me to do the work to get adjusted and to really listen to me and understand what I needed. So I think in a way that it is not for everyone, it was generally a pretty fine experience to come out.
Thank you. And
Thanks,
I'll pass
Chelsea.
it to you, Retsy.
Hi. So my question is how you viewed your gender as growing up, and it was hard to accept it.
Yeah. I mean, I was always a tomboy. I don't think that I ever had a super strong conception of my own gender. I wasn't ever super attached to being a girl. I wasn't ever super attached to being a boy. I think that I know kids who have really strong perceptions of their own gender, but I think because of the way that my parents raised me, which is to say with a lot of compassion and with a lot of free choice, I don't think that I ever had to really think about that a ton. I also am hesitant to say, oh, I've always been trans, this has always been how I've been, because that is not true. And I think that a lot of trans people can get trapped into this linear narrative of oh, I've always been trans, I've known since I was a kid, and I've always been this way. And I think that I personally think that that can be a really limiting way to think about and talk about transness. And I think that for me, what's fun about gender is exploration, right? What's fun about gender is I don't know, maybe I'm just a nerd, but I really like thinking about it and learning about it, and learning about my own gender, about other people's gender, and talking to people, not just trans people, but anybody who has thought about their gender, you know? And so I think to be able to explore is a really fun and useful and important part of being of having any gender experience, really.
Yurasi, can I just cut in here and ask a follow-up question? I was just gonna wonder, like, if you like, was there like a specific moment that you knew that you wanted to use them, they, them pronouns, or did it just kind of like happen over like gradually over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was on Tumblr a lot when I was in middle school. I don't know if other people share that experience, but I certainly was, and that is like really where I think I started to hear more about genders other than like man and woman. And I kind of like bookmarked that in the back of my mind. I was like, oh, okay, I know that now. That's something that's in my mind. And then kind of as I started questioning or like thinking about my own gender when I was in high school, I didn't really ever have like a snap moment where I was like, oh, this is the right choice for me. I like experimented with using he, him pronouns in high school. I kind of experimented within like different groups. Like I had a group that I did theater with, and I was like, "Can you use he/him pronouns? Can you call me Lou?" And that didn't end up sticking. And then with I was dating somebody at the time who was being really like supportive and was like, actually the person who was like, "Maybe you should try using they/them pronouns," and I was like, maybe I should. And so started kind of experimenting in different spaces. And so I think it was definitely a more gradual thing and a more experimental thing for me.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious as to like what that process is like, and I'll pass it to Kate for her question.
Hi, I'm Kate. So, my mom and like cis people in general, like have a really hard time like understanding non-binary and stuff like that. And so my mom, like, she's always asking me, like, but what does it mean? Like, what is it? How do they feel? And so my question is, how do you explain the way that you feel in being non-binary to a cis person who like doesn't really understand it?
That is such an interesting question. So Mallory sent me these questions beforehand, so I would kind of like know what to expect. And this was one that really puzzled me, and I really want to answer it. Like I want to take a stab at it. But this is the one question where I was like, how would I do that? I really don't know. Because I think for me, a lot of like the experience of like a trans or non-binary identity is like a non-feeling. I'm like, well, I don't feel like either of these things that like I know other people feel like, or that I was socialized to feel like. And so like, I don't know, obviously it's different for everybody. And I guess I really meant to start up top by saying like, I am, white, I'm wealthy, I have a lot of like privilege in my life. And so my experience as a non-binary person or as a trans person is like vastly different than a lot of people. And I should have said that up top, but I guess now is as good a time as any to say it. Because for me, I think that gender is like not much, if that makes sense. I have a friend who's also non-binary and who describes their gender experience as like really abundant, like they feel a lot of gender and that makes them feel different from cis people. But for me, I just kind of feel this like non-gender, this like not a super strong attachment to gender of any kind.
Thank you. That's very insightful. I mean, like my mom always struggles with it. Like my mom tries her best to be the most supportive. I came out as gay 2 years ago, and so God bless my mom. She like tries her best. She shows up the pride and everything.
Love
but
that.
the one thing she has trouble understanding is non-binary, because she's just like, is it a boy or a girl, or like how is it? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not non-binary. So thank you for giving a little that. And so I'm going to pass it to Kira.
Well, thanks, Kate, for your question. Sorry, you cut out a little bit at the end, but I think you did well to be like, I don't know, I'm not non-binary, because I think that's a great answer.
I don't understand it. I don't know if you hear me.
Now I can hear you. Sorry, I don't know if it was my computer or
my mom just doesn't get it. And I'm like, I don't either. I'm not non-binary. I'm not trans. I can't speak on behalf of all of them, but thank you. I'm going to pass it to Kira.
Hi, I'm Kira. And my question is, what do you think is the best way for someone to correct themselves if they use the wrong pronouns for someone?
I think all you need to do is like, I don't know, I don't want to be like, just correct yourself, because that I know that you're looking for more specifics. But I think for me and for a lot of people that I've talked to, um, mostly we know what we don't want, and that what we don't want is to have to attend to somebody else's mistake, if that makes sense. I know a lot of cis people who, in a really well-meaning and generally like kind way, will misgender someone and then be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And then try to use the right pronouns, be like, "I'm so sorry." And I think I don't ever really want it to be my place to be like, "It's okay," because at the end of the day, it's like not, and it's okay to be learning, and that's a different question. Um, and so I think my preference, if someone misgenders me, is for them to just quickly correct themselves, like, "Oh, wrong pronoun, oh, they," and then move on. I don't need to have a whole conversation with you about it. I don't need to like hear you apologize and then have to tell you it's okay. I just want you to like pick it up and move back on. And that is ideal for me. And I don't know. I think I know a lot of trans people who might agree.
Thank you. And I'll pass it to Mallory, I think, because she is taking cams.
Yeah, so our member Kim wishes that she could be here tonight, but she wants to ask if you have ever experienced someone overusing your pronouns or trying to speak for you or kind of overcompensate.
That's a really interesting question, because I feel like a lot of the times it kind of goes the other way. Like if someone is uncomfortable or like hasn't yet learned or doesn't really want to learn, they'll kind of swing the opposite way and not use my pronouns at all. Which frankly, I'd rather someone just use my name than my wrong pronouns, but that's just me. But yeah, so this question also was really interesting to me. And I think maybe it's related to what I was just saying to Kira and everybody about like this kind of like apologetic tack that some people tend to take. And so I think that is maybe where I've felt people like overcompensating in any kind of way. And yeah, so I kind of spoiled, I guess, my answer to this question, but that can be really frustrating. And so I think, yeah, maybe that is where I've experienced overcompensation more than like in the pronouns themselves, kind of like in the correction.
Yeah, and I was wondering, I think kind of what she like meant like by that is, has someone ever tried to like correct someone else for you or kind of speak for you in terms of your pronouns and how other people should use them?
I've had a couple experiences in class where that's happened, like with a professor who's used the wrong pronouns. And it has genuinely often been really nice. I remember I had to take a language credit, and for some reason, I don't know why, but I chose to take Latin my sophomore year. Don't recommend it, folks. If you don't like love language and rules, don't take Latin. Anyway, the professor was old. He was an old dude. And he misgendered me, and someone from the other side of the classroom corrected him, and it wasn't me. And I was like, thank God, because I think it can be really tiring to take responsibility for that all the time, especially when there's a room full of other people who know the right information. And so I would say, like, to you all and to anybody who's watching, if you're ever in a space where you know somebody uses a certain set of pronouns and someone does not use those, I think a quick correction can be so nice and like make a trans person's day a little bit better and a little bit less tiring. It doesn't even have to be like, oh, excuse me, it's blah blah blah. It can just be like she, they, like just a quick interjection to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And I have in the past been really appreciative of that from my peers.
Yeah, that's actually really helpful, because I recently, Demi Lovato came out with they, them pronouns, and I was just kind of like doing some research on that and looking into the kind of reaction of people. And I saw someone in the comments say like, congratulations, I love you. And someone replied and said, I love them, and like tried to correct
Mm.
that. And I think that was, I think, what Cameron meant in the sense of like not really understanding it and trying to like overcompensate and correct. But I really appreciate the perspective on that, because I didn't know if it was more respectful to let someone speak for themselves and kind of own that in their own way, or if it was more helpful to help them along and from having to correct someone else. So I really appreciate that. And then that actually leads into my question, which is taking a different kind of direction. And I was going to ask, how do you feel about things like gender roles and gender norms and, you know, the stereotypes in that way?
I mean, my mom is a raging feminist. I love her to death. And so I was raised that way. You know, I was raised to be a feminist and to like resist gender roles and to like, you know, when I was being socialized as a woman, I wasn't being socialized as like a woman who was subservient to a man or like anything like that. I was socialized to be like an empowered feminist woman, which I really appreciate. So I think, I don't know, I don't think that necessarily it's my transness that has changed my view on that as much as it is like the way that I was raised by my whole family, not even just my mom, but my whole family. And so, yeah, I mean, I, you know, don't like gender roles. I don't think they're good for anybody. I think that they can be uniquely harmful to trans people um, because they're so restrictive and because like thinking kind of on the spot, but I guess like maybe what I mean is that there is nobody who isn't harmed by gender roles and by stereotypes. And so, yeah, my position on that has not shifted, I think, since I was like 5 and like, you know, learned from my mom like what feminism was. So I hope my mom's watching this. I'm talking a lot about you. I'm gonna text her later. I have a radio show at my college, and every time it airs, she's like, "Did you talk about me?" And half the time I have, but the times when I haven't, I'm like, "Ooh, sorry, mom." So.
Yeah, she actually texted me and said she was excited. So I think she might be watching.
Great.
Thank you for your insight on that. I definitely agree with you. I was raised the same way. Our moms are very close friends and they share the same set of opinions. And I have 2 younger brothers, and I was always raised to believe that I am no less in any way to them. I can do exactly the same. I can do more than them. I can, you know, whatever I want to do is okay. Whatever they want to do is okay. And I think this conversation has been so much more prevalent recently, and I think it's been brought into the light a lot more. So it's really interesting to hear the perspective of someone who doesn't feel like they belong with either like gender norm. That's kind of, you know, it's very restricting. I agree. And I want to pass it to Megan for a question.
Hi, I'm Megan, and my question is, how can cis people make you feel more comfortable?
I think that I have talked a little bit about this already in some of my other answers in terms of like, you know, correcting yourself in an unobtrusive way and correcting others in a similar way. I think that is a great place to start. I think like learning is really like top on the list of like what is good for trans people, for cis people to do. And I think that like everybody who's watching and all of you who are here is like, you're already doing that, and that's really great. So yeah, I think like, you know, learning in all kinds of ways is really great. I think that like a lot of times people's first impulse is to ask a trans person any question they have about any kind of transness or any kind of like non-cisgender experience. And I think that oftentimes it's really nice to kind of try and do that work yourself. I think that a lot of like we've been having, you know, as a group, like the grand we have been having a lot of conversations, similar conversations about around race, like what we as white people can do, and a lot of what we can do is take on the work of learning for ourselves, and not be so heavily reliant on like Black people and people of color to do that work for us and to hold our hands. And I think it's a similar situation with trans people, right? Like there's so much information out there, that doing what you can to learn for yourself, so that, you know, when you meet a trans person or when you're in a space with a trans person, you aren't doing that learning for the first time. I think that is really like really important and really helpful, because, you know, not everybody wants to be an educator.
Yeah, I think if we learn about a lot of things, I think more unity will come like among people. So thank you so much for the answer. And now I am going to pass it to Krista.
Would you consider yourself a feminist, and how do you view sexism and gender discrimination as a non-binary person?
I, you know, said it earlier, I'm a feminist, absolutely, 100%. I think my mother would wring my neck if I said anything different. And I think she'd be right to do it. Yeah, I am a feminist. I think, you know, gender, binary gender has been really restrictive to me in my life. And I think even for cis people, it can be really restrictive. And I think that's because of gender roles and gender stereotyping and like gender norms. And so I think like the further away we move from a restrictive binary system of gender, the better. And I think that like a lot of what I see, in the public conversation about transness is like positioning trans as like a third point in a binary gender system, right? Like we have man, woman, non-binary, or like maybe on like a triangular axis, like man, woman, non-binary, right? And I think that is like just another example of a gender system that is restrictive and based on like broad categorization rather than like experience. And so I think, you know, I think that gender as a concept, right, like the experience of gender is not in and of itself harmful. I know a lot of people who trans and cis have a really wonderful relationship to their gender that they feel is really affirming and beautiful and like joyful and expansive. And I can't think of a single example in which that experience of a joyful, beautiful gender is in any way related to gender norms and gender categorization. And so I think gender is a really cool tool to kind of think about the way we move in the world and think about the ways that we want to resist systems of power that are harming all of us, in different ways.
Chris, like, do you mind if I just cut you off here again? I have I think like I've had this conversation a lot with my extended family members, a lot of my older extended family members who are wondering how they can be more exclusive to, or inclusive to people that are non-binary and people who are not cisgendered. And I think the conversation of that and the conversation of gender norms and gender roles is like so much more related than people would think, because I feel like, you know, generations above us, they grew up thinking that there was a right way to be a girl and there was a right way to be a boy, and there's no other options for them. And I think it's really cool that in this day and age, we are allowed to explore what it means to be a girl for ourselves, or what it means to be a boy, or what it means to in their gender at all. And I think like it's really interesting to hear you say that, you know, to hear the same things that we all agree with, but I think it just means a lot to people who are trying to learn more and people who are trying to understand more to hear it from you. So I really appreciate that. And I'll pass it to Vatsala.
Hi, my name is Sala and my pronouns are she, her. And my question is, what are some common misconceptions about being non-binary that you would like to debunk?
Wow. Oh, what a great question, Paxala. I love that. Okay. Non-binary is not just like a third point in a gender spectrum that exists from man to woman. Non-binary looks like people who don't look like me. I think what I mean to say is like a lot of the times when I see public figures who are non-binary or like who are kind of like the representations for the trans community, they look kind of like me, which is to say white, relatively thin, masculine, assigned female at birth. And I think that that is really, can I curse on here? Shitty. I think it's shitty. I don't like it. And I think that like the gender binary as a system is so intrinsically tied to colonialism and capitalism. And so to position white, thin, masculine people as like the paragon, like the exemplary trans is totally not only ignorant, but also just like entirely like disrespectful and oppressive of like gender systems that have existed outside of the colonial gender binary. I think people should check out, oh, what is their name? Sorry, I'm gonna look at my phone really quick to find this person's name because they have been doing, they're an Indian trans feminine non-binary person, and they have been doing this ongoing series of like book reviews where they like read and summarize books about race and gender and sex. And so a lot of what they're talking about is colonialism and the role that colonialism has played in kind of like the creation and maintenance of binary gender. And so I am just going to try and find them really quickly because I think they're a great person to learn from. And
Yeah, I would absolutely love to have that resource. Sounds amazing.
yeah, let me just, I'm like, can't remember even what their name starts with because my brain is kind of, I was at work for 7 hours today, so my brain's kind of soupy. But I'm going to do my best to find it. I can also answer other questions while I do this.
You can also text it to me afterward and I can send it out to everyone.
That sounds great too. That sounds yeah, okay. That sounds good. Anyway, yeah, so I was saying something about, oh, those are two gender myths that I think about a lot and that I think are most prevalent and most harmful. Oh, and also this kind of goes along with this like positioning of non-binary as a third gender that is inherently related to male and female gender. But the idea that trans people have to be pursuing some kind of like medical transition in order to be like truly trans, I think that is something that trans and cis people alike are prone to. And I think that that is harmful not only because of the ways that it is limiting and restrictive, but also because of the ways that it is specifically exclusive of people who A, don't have the money to do those kinds of procedures, or B, have been systematically like disallowed access to systems of like hospital and medical systems. And I just remember their name. Sorry, I knew that if I just talked long enough, I would come up with it. This is their Instagram. Highly recommend giving them a follow.
Thank you so much for your response, and I'm passing it on to Margaret.
Hi, I'm Margaret Delaplane, and I'm the Secretary of GENACT. And my question is, what kinds of things can schools, businesses, and workplaces do to benefit non-binary people?
That is a great question too. I think we are seeing right now in the US a really disturbing current of anti-trans legislation in state legislatures throughout the country. And what I'm talking about is like anti-trans bathroom laws, anti-trans sports laws, the restriction of access to medical care, which is to say that abortion is, like a resource that everyone should have. It's not just for cis women, right? So I think that, broadly, it would be excellent to see all of that legislation being fought on a really grand scale and to be barred from to be vetoed is the word that I'm looking for. So that's like broad strokes. The abolition of the gender binary system, another big broad stroke. But I think in terms of what you're asking, I love when there's a gender neutral bathroom. That is super awesome to me. I also think that that is really great because it often is necessarily or also an accessible bathroom, like for disabled people. And I think that is a great overlap that I see a lot. And so, yeah, so, accessible and non-gendered bathrooms is a great, awesome thing to do if you're like an institution. I think, like I was talking about before, like spending time to educate yourself so that when you're meeting someone who's trans, it's not like the first time you're ever thinking about transness. That is really great. And I think like having specific protections for trans people is really important. And I guess what I mean when I say that is like not just consequences for people who are disrespectful or harmful or abusive to trans people, because I think that the same systems that structure like punishment are also super harmful for trans people. Like so many trans people are in prison and so many trans people are in gendered prisons in really harmful ways and are really vulnerable to those systems of power. So what I mean when I say like protections is like people who are specifically trained to provide trans specific resources when they're needed. And that can be anything from like mental health resources, medical resources, personal resources, clothing, any kind of resource for trans people, I think should be like widely accessible and people should be trained in how to provide those.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. And I think I'm going to pass it to Bella.
You've already kind of answered this, but do you think that gender is useful or needed as a system at all? Should the concept even exist?
Okay, I love this question, and you're right that I have talked about it, but I think that gender systems, no good. Don't like them, don't care for them. I think they're restrictive. I think that they are limiting. I think that they result in a lot of people feeling unseen, unheard, and oppressed. However, I think that gender is really fun. I really enjoy having an experience of gender. I really enjoy thinking about gender and talking about gender. And I think that everybody deserves to have a really thoughtful and loving experience of their own gender in a way that gender systems kind of don't allow. So maybe my answer is like no to gender systems, yes, absolutely yes to gender.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass it to Sean for the next question.
Hi, my name is Sean.
Hi, Sean.
My question is, can you describe how gender is a spectrum for those who may not understand?
Yeah, I think that we're really used to thinking of gender as like a two like distinct poles. So like man, woman, and they don't interact at all, and they don't touch, and they're totally different, and they're opposites, like actual like opposites in terms of physiology, which is not true because of the existence of intersex and other like biological sex experiences. I didn't come here to talk about that, so I don't have to. So I think that, you know, back to my point, people think of gender as a thing that can exist in two ways, and those two ways are opposite each other necessarily and always. And so a more expansive view of gender is one that kind of sees not just those two, but also all of the other possible expressions of gender. And I guess like, not to turn your question around on you, Sean, but I personally don't necessarily think of gender as a spectrum, because I think that's the spectrum kind of like gives the binary system kind of like help. So like this is not a useful system always either. And what gender really is like a complex system of like expression and identity and socialization and relationships. And so maybe gender is like a soup, if that makes sense and is a helpful analogy. It doesn't have to be, but I think that like where binary gender systems are really invested in a separation between two distinct opposites, a more expansive and inclusive gender system does away with all of that. So there's like more than two genders. Genders don't have to always be opposite each other. They don't always have to be in opposition to each other. And it is more than just a biological function of life. It's more of like a soup.
No, yeah, I like that's basic. I use the word like spectrum because that was like the first thing that came onto my mind, but like I totally agree with like your viewpoint on that.
Yeah, spectrum I think is totally a useful shorthand.
Okay, so I'm going to be passing it to Janie now.
Hi, I'm Janie, and my pronouns are she, her. And my question is, how do you deal with the hate and disrespect towards non-binary people in the world?
So like what I was saying earlier, that I have a lot of privilege in my life, and so I have been lucky to be in spaces and with people who have been accepting or have been trying, which is great. But I think to think about the world we live in and the way that many people, I'm hesitant to say most because I think I'm an optimist, many people think about gender is really hard. And it's really, I think, rooted in like fear more than unkindness or hatred. And I think it's what I really want is for everyone to have the opportunity to learn and explore. And I think that it is really disheartening to see people not being afforded that opportunity. And then because they're not afforded that opportunity, to then inflict harm on people who are not cis or who they don't view as like real or true or human. And so I think at the end of the day, it's about power and fear. And those are two things that are not permanent. And those are two things that have evolved over time and so can be dismantled as well. So maybe I'm taking an optimistic view.
Thank you so much. That was like an awesome answer. I think that's all the questions, so I'm gonna pass it back.
Yeah, so those are all the questions that we have listed. And before I pass it over to Sean for his speech, I want to open up to the group for any extra questions that they may have thought of over the time that we've had so far. And I can start with one. So I think that what you said about gender being really fun is something that I think a lot of people are learning about. And I think it's so cool because I think it was always kind of seen as just your biological sex, but the difference between sex and gender is just like it's such an important distinction to make. And, there's been a lot more people in the public eye who experimenting with gender publicly. And you've seen a lot of, men who publicly identify as men and are perfectly masculine people wearing dresses and wearing skirts and, dressing up in the way that they find fun. And people are becoming more comfortable with expressing all kinds of gender and all ends of the soup, not spectrum, soup, all kinds of the soup like you described. So I was wondering how you kind of feel about like expressing more feminine or more masculine parts of your identity, or if that's uncomfortable for you, or what you kind of think about it.
Yeah. I have experimented with femininity in the past, and it is not for me. It doesn't make me feel affirmed. It doesn't make me feel like grounded in my body in a way that is good. But to me, like the experience of a queer and trans masculinity is like deeply affirming and like gentle and like warm and kind and like deeply rooted in the relationships that I have to other people. And so I think that I wouldn't be able to talk and think about my gender that way if I hadn't experimented and if I didn't feel like I have the opportunity to experiment again and always if I want to. I live right now with my partner who's cis, but really thoughtful about her gender in a way that is like, it chokes me up sometimes. And then I also live with 2 other roommates, both of whom are trans. And it has been like a deeply affirming experience, not just because I know that they're gonna like use the right words and like see me for the right like gender, but because I know that I always can experiment and learn with and from them. And that is what I really love about being trans, but also just being thoughtful about what gender can mean, as opposed to what it does mean in the context of like power systems.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really interesting. And I think experimenting is so fun. And, it's just so cool to try out different things. And I love that we're becoming more of an accepting group of people as a whole, for people, allowing people to do that without judging them or assuming things about them. And so, yeah, that's something I love. And I want to open up to the rest of the groups. Anyone else have any extra questions? Go ahead, Kate.
So I would say probably the biggest question and like thing that's talked about in the like as far as gender and like it always puzzles me is like, and I'm curious on your insight is how many genders do you think there are? Because people say like right, because I never understand because there's like I hate to say like Republicans that are like, yeah, I know that are like there's only 2 genders. So I'm curious like on your insight on that.
Yeah. I think there's as many genders as there are stars in the sky. I think I read that somewhere and I was like, fuck yeah. But I think like even between people who share a gender identity or like use the same term to describe their gender, there's so much variability. Like the way I was talking about my friend earlier, Marin, who experiences their gender as this like abundance, and I have this experience of gender as kind of a non-presence, and we both use the same word to describe ourselves. And so I think like it's cheesy to say it, but there's like as many genders as there are people because everybody is having a different experience because of their relationship to their body, their relationship to their like there's the things that surround them, their friends, their family, their expression, the things they learn, the things they like to do. Like everybody is having, even in just like a slight way, a different experience of gender than the person next to them. And so I think that is like, I think a lot of people, I think that like the like there are only two genders talking point is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of like sex as a binary concept, which is in itself incorrect, because there are so many different like chromosomal and like genital expressions to which we ascribe gendered terms. And so even to say that like there's only two biological sexes, so there's only two genders, is like at its foundation wrong. So yeah, I think there's like there can be as many genders as there are people, and I think that there can be as many words to describe gender as there are people.
That's very insightful, because like people always like, I don't know what it is with like straight people, but they love to like, they see a gay person even remotely and they're like, you know everything about it, right? I know a lot about it, but I don't know why people love to group together the LGBTQ community, and I'm like, I don't own the gay people, just happen to be gay, but that's very insightful, so thank you for that.
Thanks for the question, Kate.
All right, does anyone else have any questions they want to ask? Once, twice. Okay, cool. I'm going to pass it over to Sean now to share their experience on gender and kind of wrap up the conversation for tonight.
Do you mind if I share one parting word?
Yes, of course.
Which is just to say everyone should embrace learning and experimentation. That's it. Just like try things and try words and try clothes and try everything and always be learning. And those two things are the same kind of. Okay, thanks for all the questions. It was so lovely to talk to all of you, and I'm so excited to hear you talk also, Sean.
Yeah, and I perfectly agree with that. I think something that Kate said about how people have the thought of like there are only two genders is because, you know, they've been raised to believe that, and that's their personal experience with gender, and that they fit right where they were assigned. And then so they assume that everyone feels that way, but I think it's really important to remember that everyone thoughts and feelings at any given time are completely different. So I really appreciate the insight there, and I'm going to pass it to Sean. Sean might be frozen. I'm gonna give him a second. There we go. Ask to unmute. Sean, if you are able to hear me at all, you might want to try leaving the meeting and coming. Oh wait, I think I see you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank God. I'm so sorry. My connection just decided to say, screw you, right when I was about to talk. Okay, so like if I ever cut out, please like do not hesitate, but on my screen, you'll probably hesitate nonetheless. Like Mallory.
Sean, I might suggest trying to leave the meeting and coming back. I'll let you in right away, don't worry. I don't know if you can hear me. Not sure. I know if I remove them, they won't be able to come back. So I don't want to do that. Yeah, Sean, can you hear me?
Yes, I just connected to my personal hotspot on my phone, so I should be good, hopefully.
Okay, don't worry about it.
It's I apologize greatly for this.
Sean, I think it's better if we just try that.
I'm gonna try leaving.
Yeah, let's try that.
Yeah.
All right, I'll see you in 1 second. This happened on our first meeting that we live streamed with Sarah McBride. I literally like my monitor was connected to my computer and it started just playing my voice back at me. And that happened for like 5 minutes and we couldn't figure. It was just, it was really fun to have that experience. first time that we ever went live, but Sean, I'm sure will be back in a second. Okay, I think he's coming back in.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
That's much better.
Okay, I'm so sorry for that. My internet just decided to curse me. Okay, so I have a pre-made script. I'm probably gonna go off track a little bit because my experience with gender is something that like is really hard for me to put into words, and like will be really hard for me to put into words like probably my whole life, because I'm still at that point where like I'm still experimenting with it because I'm so young and we have no idea what the future beholds. But so like ever since I was a kid, maybe about like late elementary school, early middle school, I started to realize that like I didn't really fit in with the boys. Like, big surprise, that was because I was gay. And it coming to the terms that I was gay and realizing that I was gay kind of at first kind of made me fall into a lot of the stereotypes in which like, oh, all gay men are feminine. So I wanted to be like, I don't know why, but I just wanted to like fit that stereotype and be like the perfect gay. So like I started acting feminine, and like I did that all through middle school, and then like late 2020, early 2021, I realized like I don't like this. It's been like absolute torture for me, and I didn't feel feminine enough. I didn't feel masculine enough. It was like a constant pull at the like emptiness in there. But when I first heard the term non-binary, it was through social media and through a lot of my friends who identified as like trans or non-binary or anything of that big soup of genders. And at first I was like with you, Lucy, I was just like, oh, bookmark this, cool, we know this. It's a fun fact. But like once I started having these feelings of the disconnect, was able to vent to them, thankfully, because it was a very positive community that I found myself in. And they were able to help me through this and help me experiment with pronouns like he, they, she, they at some point, she, her at one point, like they, them. And when I got to they, them, it was the one that felt like the most, the best for me in a way. But I still kind of felt a disconnect because I didn't really love them. I was just thinking like, oh, I wasn't a male and I wasn't a female either, so I have to go by they them, right? So like it was more of a constant pool of that like struggle in the emptiness in there even. And what like helped me realize was actually like getting a lot into politics and going more into politics and having my views change a bunch and seeing that gender is this like big swoop and it doesn't really matter where you place on it as long as you feel confident in yourself. For me, it's like very confusing because Lucy, you were talking about how your friend had that like abundance of gender and how you had that like disconnect from gender in a way. Yeah, you're right. And like I kind of had a mix of both of them, which is like kind of gender fluid, but I don't really want to like put a label on it. But it's times where like I feel one way towards this one gender. I feel like really masculine and I love he, him pronouns. Or then like another day I could feel really feminine, or another day I could feel all of them, another day nothing. And that was a nightmare at first. Being able to like accept that and being able to come to terms with that took a lot of work, a lot of therapy, which thankfully I was blessed with an amazing therapist who helped me along this way and helped me to like be able to accept myself and like know that there isn't like one, like you said, Lucy, there isn't one way to be trans. And also like helping me know that we don't really know what the future holds because it's the future, it cannot be predicted. So even where I'm at, I'm proud of myself for getting there. But I know that in the future, there are probably going to be a lot of different obstacles facing my way. But thankfully, I have supportive groups like my friends and Generation Activism to help me along the way.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sean. I'm so sorry about the beginning of that, but thank you so much for sharing your experience. I find it so interesting to hear that you have had this much experience and have had this much of a journey with your gender, because when I met you, you had already started using he, they pronouns, and you, to me, seem so comfortable with them. But of course, you never know someone's journey, someone's experience just by looking at them and talking to them one time. So I really appreciate you sharing and feeling comfortable and vulnerable enough with us to be able to share that you have had this journey to come to who you are. And I'm just so proud of you for getting there. And I hope you know that everyone here will support you, whatever changes may come and whatever you need us to do in support of your identity and your gender, you'll have it here. So thank you so much for sharing. I also just want to thank all of you guys, all my members, for your questions tonight. I feel like this conversation was so helpful and so needed. I think it's such an interesting conversation to have because gender is a huge topic and there's so many places where you could begin. And I'm so grateful to hear from such amazing people like Lucy and Sean because, you know, the host of this meeting, I'm a cisgendered woman and I could not tell you the first thing about what it feels like to be non-binary or what it feels like to be trans. And so I just really appreciate anyone who is out there and feels comfortable sharing their story and feels comfortable sharing who they are, because it helps the rest of us learn so much. And I really appreciate both of you deciding to talk with us tonight. For anyone watching at home, thank you so much for tuning in. Our Instagram is generation.activism. Our TikTok is generation.activism. Our Twitter is GENACT2 if you want to follow along. If you want to watch last week's video, we met with Jen Randolph, who is a special needs mom, and shared with us her experience having a special needs family member. And stay tuned for more coming up soon. We're really excited to head into the summer with a lot more fun episodes and panels coming up. So stay tuned for that. Thank you one more time to Lucy. If you have anything else to say, feel free to say it.
Thank you for having me. It was so nice to talk to all of you, and thank you to everybody who's watching.
Thank you so much.
And I will be following your TikTok right after this.
Thank you so much. And yeah, that's all we have for tonight. So thank you so much, guys. I will be